For a long time, Blackbeard seemed as though he was set up to be the final villain of the story. But at this point, there is an even greater argument that the final boss will in fact be Im, the king who rules the world from the shadows. At the moment, it feels almost too soon to make the claim that Im will be the final villain, as we still have no idea if he is even a strong character. One Piece has its fair share of rulers who are not actually that powerful themselves. However, in light of the recent events of the Wano arc, it seems like the true story of One Piece is beginning to become more and more clear, as well as what exactly Luffy is supposed to represent, all of which points to a strong possibility that the final conflict of the story may not in fact be pirate versus pirate, but pirate versus god. So today we're going to be comparing the cases for Im versus Blackbeard, and making the best guess we can as to whether or not Im will turn out to be a powerful fighter and potentially the final boss. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe, and make sure you're listening to this video with crystal clear audio, with Raycon, the sponsor for this video. Raycon everyday earbuds are by far the best choice for high quality earbuds on the market, period, as they offer the same sound quality as other premium brands, but at half the price. You get perfect audio clarity with Raycons as they naturally block out all background noise, while you're still able to easily toggle noise isolation on or off. These earbuds are specifically designed to perfectly fit the curvature of the human ear, so that not only will they never fall out, you can keep them in for hours and hours without ever feeling any discomfort. And I mean literally, they give you 8 hours of playtime and 32 hours of battery life. That's why I personally love to wear them while taking long walks outside. Not to mention, they are extremely durable and water resistant, so no worries about wearing them in the rain, dropping them in the pool, or even accidentally having them go through the washing machine. And the best part is, you can get 15% off your Raycons today. Just click the link in the description box below, or go to buyraycon.com/morge to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. So that aside, does the narrative of One Piece dictate that the final conflict will inevitably have to be Luffy versus God? I am now inclined to believe so, because the fundamental shift in readers' understanding from the beginning of One Piece to the present day is the realization that this is so much more than a battle between pirates for a great treasure. When One Piece began, we were fed the idea of becoming the king of the pirates as the end-all be-all, a title attained by achieving what no other pirate could do, which was getting the One Piece. As such, it paints a picture of a battle for supremacy among pirates, which in itself naturally sets us up to expect other pirates to be the primary antagonists of the story. However, at this point in time, we now know that Pirate King is not in fact the end-all be-all. If anything, that title and the treasure of One Piece remains an enticing carrot on a stick for our protagonist Luffy to chase after, but in actuality there are far greater stakes at play. More than Pirate King, Luffy is meant to pick up the role of Joy Boy. More than just finding the One Piece, Luffy is meant to bring the dawn of the world. Oda never lied to his readers about any of this. You can look throughout the story and all of his ideas have always been tied together. The story has always been slowly revealing to the reader the greater meaning attached to what becoming Pirate King or getting the One Piece could mean. The Will of D, the war against the world government, the dawn of the world, all of these ideas are perfectly woven into our initial understanding of what the story was about, such that the true conflict of One Piece is both far grander and yet exactly the same as what we were told in Chapter 1. However, as our perspective has shifted, so too has this notion that the final battle must be against another evil pirate to get the greatest treasure and take the title of Pirate King. To begin with, if what Luffy is actually fighting for is the title the King of the Seas, that is, after all, his understanding of what Pirate King is, then in actuality, this title does already belong to someone. The one who sits on the empty throne is essentially the king of the world. After all, above any singular pirate, the world government is the true ruling force that has the greatest claim to dominion over the seas at the moment. And the one who sits upon the throne as the heart of the world government is essentially the king of the world, and that man is currently Im. Naturally, this fact is hidden from the world at large, but even if Luffy were to attain the title of Pirate King ahead of any of his pirate rivals, he would not in fact be king of the sea, so long as Im exists. However, does that necessarily mean that Luffy defeating Im is a definitive eventuality in the story, or that it would be the final conflict he must overcome? I think to answer that question, we would have to first answer the question, is One Piece a pirate story first and foremost, Or is it a story about rebellion against heaven? I personally think at this point in time, it is at its core a story about rebellion against heaven masquerading as a pirate's adventure. Again, never betraying the initial concept we were given that this is a story about pirates, but the reason we are reading a story about pirates is because the idea of being a pirate is so intrinsically tied to the idea of being free, of following one's own path outside of the bounds of authority. And by using a large cast of pirates, Oda could eventually get to the final conflict of the story, which is having this pirate hero bring freedom to the world at large, defeating the ultimate authority that exists, the celestial dragons that rule as gods far above in heaven. Which does make me believe that defeating Im would be the final and most important battle for Luffy in the story. At the end of the day, freedom is the single most important theme in One Piece. The conflict between freedom versus an authoritarian force will be the concluding battle in my opinion. That's not to say that Blackbeard isn't still extremely important to the final conflict of One Piece, as I like to think of it as a sort of triangle of concepts. The worst type of force throughout One Piece has always been the sort of oppressive, controlling, authoritarian force that strips people of their freedom. As time has gone on, Oda has chosen to repeatedly portray these types of forces as evil gods, often tying together the idea of absolute authority and control with a villain that is essentially playing God. That was how Enel was in Skypiea, the first and most blatant false god we were ever introduced to, who could literally monitor every single conversation in his realm and immediately wipe out any voice of dissent in an instant. Later on, we were introduced to Doflamingo, the heavenly demon, who was also convinced he was a celestial being, superior to mere mortals who existed only for him to control. And again, we get this idea of a god who has absolute authority in his realm and who can make any dissenting voice disappear. And finally, Oda began to openly refer to the world government and its iron-fisted authority as essentially the god of this world as well, with of course the celestial dragons as the ruling class of the world government openly believing themselves to be gods, living up above in heaven, etc. And of course, complete control and absolute subservience is the demand of these gods as well, as they also make any dissenting voices disappear, a la Buster Carl, or perhaps even this upcoming Great Cleansing. Then on the flip side, you have Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates, who obviously represent freedom. There's not much to discuss here. Everywhere they go, they tear down injustice and oppression, they don't force anything on anyone, and rather encourage the people of each island to make their own choices, their own decisions. They don't steal or take from the weak, rather Luffy imagines a world where everyone simply has as much as they need, etc, etc. Essentially, they symbolize a very idealistic notion of freedom, wherein no one imposes one's will upon another, and greed and violence may be eliminated by everyone being able to live in harmony and do as they please with as much as everyone needs, etc. And then finally you have the third side of the triangle, which is what most other evil pirates tend to represent throughout the story, which is also a desire for freedom, but with all the dark aspects of absolute freedom that can come with that. Big Mom's notion of freedom is essentially being able to take whatever you want, do whatever you want, no matter how much harm that causes others, which is why her greed and selfishness is emphasized so heavily, with both of her introductions marked by us being told that she's had entire nations destroyed and pillaged just because she wants some sweets. On the flip side, Kaido is all about returning to a pure state of nature with unbridled violence where might makes right. That's his version of freedom. Essentially, pirate antagonists are used throughout the story to represent a dark version of freedom, which in many ways is just as bad as the authoritarian forces, and Blackbeard is of course the ultimate representation of this idea. He is fairly open about the type of freedom he represents, which is absolute chaos, anarchy, and destruction. He wants to tear down society, tear down all authority. He wants to do whatever he wants to the world. And it's interesting that the two times in the story that Oda makes an extensive case in favor of the need for authority, the need for the Marines, the need for the justice system, is through Hannibal and Sengoku, and both times in direct contrast to Blackbeard and his views. Essentially, Blackbeard is one of the few figures that Oda actually uses to highlight the need for authority and order, as Blackbeard's version of freedom is extremely problematic as well. So basically, you can divvy up most forces in One Piece into these three categories, with some characters even being swapped around between categories such as Wapol the Pirate versus Wapol the King, which in itself goes to another theme of One Piece, which is the nature of authority and how the concept of justice or right and wrong is fluid. Ideas I expand upon in this video, you can click on the top right, but the bottom line is that if the bottom left corner of the triangle represents the good guys, then the other two corners represent the two types of evils in the One Piece world, the two types of evils that Luffy regularly fights against. As such, the primary conflicts of One Piece are generally pure freedom versus control, and pure freedom versus flawed freedom. Note that while pure freedom, what Luffy represents, is and always has been represented by the sun, which you can see across the entire 1000 chapter epic, it's just gotten less and less subtle as time has gone on. Luffy has always been the one who brings the sun, the Straw Hats are always fighting for the dawn, their ship's symbol is literally the sun and has been for some time, the sun tattoo has always been a symbol of freedom, various races worship the sun, all of this was always built into the story, leading up to Luffy finally emerging as the sun god, the freest being imaginable. On the other hand, both Blackbeard and the world government are meant to represent darkness. It's just two different types of darkness, but Oda is pretty explicit with characterizing both of them as darkness throughout the series. That's because just as much as Luffy represents the sun, Blackbeard and the world government both are the most important representations of the two great evil concepts in the series, control and flawed freedom. It's natural that these are the two final forces, the final two enemies that Luffy will have to face at the end of the story. And while for a long time I believed Blackbeard would be the final villain, that was largely because the world government was simply an entity for so long. It was not something that Luffy could actually punch or beat up. At best, Luffy could take down Akainu, which is still a very likely matchup for him in my opinion, but it was difficult to say that Akainu truly represents the world government itself. He feels more like a loyal dog to the world government, similar to Lucci, and is still beholden to higher authorities than himself. So Blackbeard was the default villain because the world government had no face. But then Im was introduced, and everything changed. Now there is someone that actually represents the world government and, more importantly, the Celestial Dragons. Up till now, sure, the Celestial Dragons were the gods of the world, but pretty much all of them are extraordinarily weak and not exactly commanding figures. Im is not confirmed to be strong by any means, but at the moment he certainly has the potential to be, and considering his portrayal so far, shrouded in mystery, the intimidating aura, the absolute command over the Gorosei, the framing of him sitting far above the rest of the world, well, all of this together doesn't feel like the typical Spandam or Orochi-esque weakling leader that is just a figurehead. So far, Im has been made to give off an extremely powerful presence every time he's been on screen. It certainly feels more likely to me that this could indicate actual strength, rather than being merely a figurehead. But more than that, ultimately I think it's likely that Im is strong, simply out of necessity for Luffy to have an enemy he can defeat that is the ultimate representation of this evil. The evil of a controlling force, the evil of an all-powerful god. While defeating Blackbeard is certainly extremely important to the story, defeating Blackbeard doesn't necessarily put an end to the long-running conflict of One Piece, or complete its thematic conflict either. Don't get me wrong, there is a tremendous amount of meaning to defeating Blackbeard, as I elaborate on in this analysis from back when I believed he would be the final villain, as both Blackbeard and Luffy are fighting for the same goal, and both have the potential to create a new future for the world, which is why eliminating the dark future, the incorrect vision of the Will of D, is a necessary part for Luffy's journey. To bring about the right path, he needs to first put an end to the one who is trying to set the world onto the wrong path. It would likely be the most important moment for Luffy as a pirate, as for so long he has clashed over and over with other pirates as to what the correct version of being a pirate is, and Blackbeard, as the alternate Pirate King to Luffy, who has the same dream but pursues it in all the wrong ways, is someone that Luffy must overcome as a validation of Luffy's own journey, the path that Luffy has taken and the type of pirate that Luffy has chosen to be, as well as a victory for the right type of freedom versus the wrong. However, all that being said, defeating Blackbeard on its own, I feel cannot actually close the conflict of the story. Defeating Blackbeard can eliminate the wrong outcome of the Will of D, but it cannot on its own fulfill the Will of D. Defeating Blackbeard cannot end the long night of the world government's reign, which is what bringing the dawn of the world is all about. That's why I believe that Blackbeard may be the penultimate villain to defeat, rather than the final villain at this point. As of the two evils of the story, I have begun to feel that at the end of the day, this conflict of freedom versus control is simply more important to the story. and I think that's why Oda has taken more time building to this as the true conflict of the story. Again, for a long time we were more focused on pirates fighting pirates, but that's precisely because Oda wanted to take his sweet time, slowly introducing us to the underlying problem beneath all of this, which is that there are worse problems than pirates. Even though it may seem like most pirates are bad, the supposed good authority figures are even worse, and that as much as pirates may break the rules and cause chaos, the even greater problem is those in power who seek to take everyone's freedom away entirely, setting the stage for, ironically, a pirate to have to be the hero for this type of a world. We could tell Blackbeard was going to be an important villain early on. Oda wasn't trying to hide that fact. This is a story of pirates versus pirates at first, but we were deliberately not told that the world government was evil early on. That was the true story of One Piece that Oda chose to hide from us for so long, so as to allow us to slowly realize bit by bit for ourselves exactly why freedom matters so much in this world, and how those with authority can turn into unjust gods that ultimately become greater evils than pirates ever could. Essentially, just as Oda chose to introduce the story to us to be supposedly about becoming king of the pirates and beating out other pirates for a great treasure, only to have us slowly realize the true themes of the story and the far greater conflict to bring freedom to the seas and the dawn of the world, I think so too were we made to feel early on that Blackbeard, another pirate, would be the final villain, whereas in reality we were always leading to the true final villain being the face of all oppression and injustice in this world, the all-controlling god who rules from above. Because at the end of the day, the world government is the true villain, as the force that oppresses freedom is the root of all evil. As bad as pirates are, how much of their evil and their dark pursuit of freedom is birthed in retaliation to the all-controlling oppressive force in the first place? There's a reason why no matter how much pirates hate each other, they all seem to hate the world government even more. Thinking back, why is it that with so many of the pirate villains Luffy faces throughout the series, we are made to feel sympathetic to them in some way? As bad as they are, most of them actually became the way they were because they were born into a world of injustice, a world run by an evil force. Kaido saw a world of hierarchy and inequality, and made it his mission to tear it down and replace it with a world of violence and, in his mind, fairness. Big Mom was a well-meaning child who was taught all the wrong values by a world government agent who wanted to turn her into the ultimate weapon. Arlong turned out to be a product of the racism fishmen faced under the world government's rule. And of course, Blackbeard himself seems to have a particularly tragic backstory that has bred a hatred for the world government that we have yet to explore. If the world government is the true root of all evil, I think it is most likely that the man behind the world government is the final villain, especially considering the slow build-up we've been getting to the idea of defeating God as the finale of the story. Because what's interesting is that while many of the pirate enemies that Luffy fights are given a sympathetic side in some way, who are the two characters that most readers tend to reference as being the most outright evil figures in the entire series? Because the names that I see get thrown around most often are Doflamingo and Enel, and that is no mistake. The two characters that Oda has portrayed as false gods, the heartless rulers who controlled everyone below them with absolute authority, who viewed themselves as being above mortals, believing themselves to be divine in some sense, these are the two most clearly evil and least sympathetic characters in the story. Pirates are bad, but these false god figures are portrayed to be the worst. And really, that's why readers hate the world government so much as well. The world government functions the same way as Enel or Doflamingo, just on a broader scale. It's just that again, for so long, it was simply an entity without a face. But now we have a face, now we have a figure that seems truly to be what Doflamingo was to Dressrosa, or what Enel was to Skypiea. It's just that Im is that to the entire world. And finally, with Luffy's emergence as the sun god figure, I think that sets us up perfectly for an answer to the false god that rules the world. This is the most important reason that I feel that Im may simply be the final opponent, because for the longest time, it seemed as though Luffy's destiny, the true destiny of the will of D, is in fact to defeat God. Again, if the Celestial Dragons are gods, then the D tribe are stated to be the enemies of the gods. It seems as though the defeat of God is innate to the will of D. From all the way back in Skypiea, it was foreshadowed that Luffy's true role is to be the one who can defeat God, God's natural enemy. And perhaps most tellingly is the finale of Skypiea, when Enel, an evil god, is about to destroy everyone and everything. And interestingly, the people begin to pray. They begin to pray for a god to save them, even in the face of this evil god. They pray for another god, a true god, to come to their aid. And what happens next is Luffy answers those prayers. Luffy destroys Enel's Raigo, ending the darkness, and most importantly and explicitly, Luffy brings out the sun at the same time. In this moment, 800 chapters ago, I think we saw a glimpse of the end of the story, when the people at the mercy of an evil god need another god to end the darkness. Luffy, the representation of the sun, is the answer. In this moment, we saw a glimpse of Luffy, the sun god, ending the reign of the evil false god, delivering the people from the darkness, bringing back the sun, and now decades later we see him coming into his role literally as the sun god, and he is taking up this role as the sun god at the same time as we have just learned that there is in fact a shadowy evil god that has been ruling the world with absolute authoritarian power for 800 years. It seems that now the pieces have just been set. We've just learned about who needs to be dethroned to bring the dawn at the same time as it has been established that Luffy is the sun god who will bring the dawn. As such, with him, I think we finally have a suitable opponent for the final and most fundamental thematic conflict of One Piece, the conflict of freedom versus control, to play out. Something that I think no remaining villain in the series can offer, which is why at this point I think Im and not Blackbeard will be the final villain. But let me know who you think the final villain will be in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can support me on Patreon to get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics.